let's welcome our speaker, Mr. Rajapandian Chelimuthu, who will teach us the basics of Ethereum in such a way that we will never get it wrong. As a child, where we learned our ABCs, the punctuations, the numbers, no wonder why this is an important session. We will start from the basics because our speaker is a passionate techie, a software engineer at Bank of America in area of open source blockchain and engineering technology. What makes him feel relevant? He has experimented with major blockchain platforms in the market. He believes in the practice of sharing knowledge will make a better community and therefore writes articles on microservices and blockchain, which was recognized by Linux Foundation in 2020 and awarded Lyft Scholarship. Just before the session, I just want to inform everyone that feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A chat. We will answer these at the end of our session. Over to you, Mr. Rajapandian.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. So good day. So I see many joining from different parts of the world. So good day to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who has joined this session. So this session will be about Ethereum, basically, but it starts from blockchain. So you should know what blockchain is and then get into what Ethereum is and how it works. So the session is designed in such a way that you get a good hold of the blockchain concepts, how Ethereum works, and by the end of the session, you'll be able to build a smart contract and you'll be able to test it. So that is what is guaranteed. So without further ado, let me share my screen and let's start this session. So I suppose people are able to see my screen, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so welcome to the Ethereum basic session. Okay, the session has a quick intro to blockchain to start with, and we'll discuss about what makes blockchain technology unique. So we'll see some of the implementations of blockchain. We'll see a couple of implementations. I'll be giving you an example. Then I'll introduce you to Ethereum. So what Ethereum is, how is it different from the much hyped Bitcoin? Then we'll look into what are the Ethereum fundamentals. So what makes the Ethereum blockchain work and what is it underhood, the core machinery that powers it. Then we'll see the technical concepts around Ethereum. So to implement an Ethereum smart contract or a DApp, what are the core concepts that are needed? Then we'll build a smart contract using the Remix online IDE. And finally, we'll have the Q&A session. So I have a little activity at the end as well. So you can do the same example that I show you in this session. And there is a workbook that will also be attached, that will be provided to you. So involved with the digital economy. So we have come across different eras. Okay. So recently we had the Web 1.0, which is the information era where we were able to view all the information anywhere in the world. People are able to access it from their mobile, from their desktop, from whatever devices that they have that had access to the internet. Then we had the Web 2.0, which is the social era, where people were able to communicate with each other. Okay, they were able to share their emotions, they were able to share their feelings, they were able to share every other information that was in addition to the Web 1.0 era. Now we are in the Web 3.0 era, which is called the digital economy, where you'll be able to transfer value to anyone in the world. So, I mean, it was still possible with the internet banking accounts, the IMPS that you have in India and other P2P transfers that are provided by your banking partners. But still, a peer-to-peer network was not earlier available, which is now enabled because of this Web 3.0, which is called the value transfer, which is a pure digital economy. So this is where we are headed to, and you will all be a part of this digital economy once you complete or understand the core fundamentals of blockchain and its implementations. So a quick intro to blockchain to people who are new to the blockchain world. Okay. A normal web application architecture is purely a client server architecture where you have the web browser or your mobile, or you have some API to communicate with the backend. So the backend normally could be, it could be a Java application, it could be a Node.js application, or a Rust application that is running in some kind of a centralized hosting. And normally in these kinds of applications, what you do is the data is stored centrally to a relational database, or in the recent times, we have seen the NoSQL databases like MongoDB and the other NoSQL databases. So what basically happens is, like, when you have a centralized hosting, the company that hosts this application has complete control over the application and its functionality. So no, it can give you access, it can deny you access. There will be a constant uptime, downtime, and the data stored. So recently we have the GDPR rules coming up in the European Union, where no, there are conditions, there are terms and conditions around which how companies can have access to customer data. So these are some of the traits of a web app or normal web application that is currently prevailing in most parts of the world. Okay, so where are we moving to? What is a blockchain architecture? A blockchain architecture is nothing. You still can access all the backend APIs from your web browser or your mobile or any kind of a medium to call the APIs. But the catch is you have a decentralized hosting. A decentralized hosting is nothing but the same code will be deployed to multiple nodes in different parts of the world. So there is practically no downtime. So unless and until the complete internet shuts down, there is practically no downtime to the application that is deployed to this decentralized system. Next, we have the world database. What blockchain assures you is that whenever you store some data, okay, the core UPS of blockchain, USP of blockchain is that whenever you store some data on the blockchain, it is a single source of truth, which means every node, every part of the world, so in whatever part of the world the application is posted in, will be able to see that specific information available to everyone. So it could be me accessing that application from India, or someone in the US who is accessing the application. The information that is displayed to you is one and the same, and an immutable digital ledger. So this is one of the highlights of blockchain. So what basically an immutable digital ledger is that blockchain assures you that you can only add a date, add some data. It could be a file or a text or whatever it is. So when you add some data to the blockchain, it is final, which means once the data is stored in the blockchain, it can never be deleted. So many come to the argument that no, you spoke about GDPR, where there are restrictions to how companies can access data over the of customers. Okay, so this violates the GDPR rules. It is basically an immutable ledger, but what can be done is you can deny access to this data. So you can have a flag on this data which denies access to the data after a specific point of time. So these are some of the intricacies that blockchain handles. So we can discuss it further during our upcoming sessions if possible. So it solves double spend. So what basically a double spend is, see, you have a PDF, a book, you're an author of a book, and you have your book exported as a PDF. So the book has a value in the initial time when you plan to sell it. So the first copy, it could sell for $100. Okay. So when you sell it to a customer, what if he could make a copy of it and he produces more and more copies, and he, rather than you selling it directly, he makes copies of it and he sells it somewhere else. Say he uploads it to a torrent site, or he uploads it to a Google Drive and someone downloads it. So the value of that document or the PDF drastically goes down over the time. At some point, it goes down to zero. So this double spend. So it not only refers to just the PDF, it also refers to the monetary value that is attached to some currency. For example, say digital currencies, a US dollar. We have the digital currency, digital replica of a US dollar now available, the Tether USD. So what double spend means is you can spend only once. So the real value you can spend only once, and blockchain assures you that it checks if the item that you are selling or the asset that you are selling is already spent or not. And if it has already been spent, it will never allow you to re-spend it, or it will never allow you to double spend it. Okay, the value of an asset remains the same as long as it remains it with it has the original value. So the core cryptographic concepts. So the core cryptographic concepts that we will be discussing today are the hashes, the public and private keys. So these two are the foundations of blockchain. So when you are into blockchain technology, every time when you want to interact with the blockchain, so these two are mandatory. So you should be knowing what a hash is and what public and private keys are. So a hash basically is whenever you pass any input to a hashing algorithm, it could be any algorithm. There are different types of algorithms that are in the world right now. I mean, we will not be going deep into those algorithms at the moment, but still, a hash, when you pass an input to a hash, it will give predefined, it's not predefined, it is the length of the output is the same, but it differs. The content, actual content of the hash differs based on the input that is passed in. And a hash algorithm guarantees that whenever you have an output, the hashed value, you will not be able to retrieve the data back from the hashed content. And whenever you have a simple change to the content that is passed in, the output hash will be completely different. So it could be a single letter change or a addition of a new paragraph. The complete hash content, the hashed value of that input content will be completely different from what it was earlier. The public and private keys. So this is the core part of interacting with the blockchain. So whenever you want to interact with a blockchain, you basically use the public and private keys. So what basically a public and private key is? Public, as you know, whenever you want some data to be, or you want people to know about you who sent this information, it will be made public. So in the same sense, a public key is nothing but that can be shared with anyone that you know or to the public. A private key is close to you. It is like a password. Okay? So you should not be sharing it with anyone. So combining the hash and the public and private keys, the digital signatures, digital certificates, and also the Merkle trees. The Merkle trees basically use the hashes to form a tree out of all the transactions that are passed into a block. So we'll be seeing it in the coming slides. So the hashes and the public and private keys form the basis of blockchain, which are also aided by the digital signatures, digital certificates, and Merkle trees. So what basically is encryption and hashing? So encryption and hashing are completely different. Encryption means you have a data and you encrypt it. Why do you encrypt some data? You do not want the middlemen or hackers that intrude to your network to see what data is passed in the network. And whenever the receiver wants to see the data, he'll be using a decryption key. So what happens is the encryption and the decryption happens in the application, the server basically. Say in case of the bank account, whenever you log into your account, the username and password that you feed into your browser, when it goes as a plain text over the network, anyone who intrudes to your network like a hacker or a middleman, they'll be able to see your username and password and they'll be able to hack your application and withdraw all your funds. So what protects that is called the encryption and the decryption. So we have different kinds of encryption available. One such as the AES, asymmetric encryption, that is prevalent in the application domains. So an encryption means basically you are protecting sensitive information from the intruders. But a hashing is something that is used to validate an information. When you pass some data to a hash function, it is going to give you a hashed output. But the difference between encryption and hashing is that you can decrypt and encrypted data back to the original source. But hashing, you will not be able to trace it back to the original data. You'll only be able to verify or validate if the data that is received by you is the same as the original or not. How can you do that? So when you have the hash data with you and the original content, so when you find the hashing algorithm is basically public. Okay, you can go upload your data on the web, apply that hash function, and see if the data, the hash output that you receive, the string that you receive, is the same as the one that you're currently holding. The document produces the same hash output or not. So that is called validation of data. So these two in conjunction will help blockchain technology secure the network and applies trust on the network. So how basically a blockchain look? Now we have seen blockchain is a chain of data. It has chain of blocks and other stuff. No, that is mostly when you scroll over the internet on the sites, you'll see blockchain is a block of data. It gets chained together. So what basically a block contains? A block basically contains a block header. A block header is nothing but the hash value of the previous block. Generally, the first block that is mined, say even it could be any blockchain, that will be called as the Genesis block. Genesis is nothing but the root block. It will not have any transaction, which is any data in it. So that hash value will be appended to the first block header. And then we have the hash value, the current hash value. Say, for example, if I make a few transactions with the blockchain, all the transactions within a specified time interval or a bucket. So why do I say or? Is because different kinds of blockchains use different kinds of mechanisms to define what a block should contain. So for certain blockchains, it could be the timeout. Say, for example, Ethereum, it could mean 10 seconds. Bitcoin right now, it could mean like 10 minutes. So every blockchain has its own mechanism of what a block should contain. So every block will have a set of transactions bundled together. It will also have the hash value. So as you see in this slide, a transaction will be transformed to a hash. This is called a Merkle tree. A Merkle tree is nothing but transactions will be hashed together. Two transactions will be taken in, the hash value will be taken, and the other two transactions will be taken, it will be hashed together. The two hashes will be again bind together to form a different hash. And that's in that way, as long as you have so many transactions in the chain, they will be bundled together as a Merkle tree to form the root hash. So that root hash along with the transactions will be added to the block and that will be mined. Okay, so this block mining, it will be done by a miner in the blockchain. So we'll be seeing who are the participants in the blockchain in the coming slides. So what are the traits of a block? So we have seen what are the traits of a blockchain architecture. So what are the traits of a blockchain? Blockchain is basically a digital immutable ledger that will continuously grow. So why does it continuously grow? When you say immutable, you'll not be able to delete what is added to the blockchain. So in that case, it will be an immutable ledger. So when each and every block is mined, which is a set of transactions that are getting mined into a block, you will not be able to delete the transaction or the data that has been put into the block. So that is why we call it as a digital ledger. And it has unique qualities of trust and openness. Why does it have the unique qualities of trust and openness? Because the data once added, it stays in the blockchain as long as it's alive. So the data is there, and anyone who wishes to see that transaction data can go to the blockchain transaction. He can search for the transaction data in the Explorer and he'll be able to see it. Trust. Whenever you add a transaction to the blockchain, whenever you're communicating with the blockchain, you will be providing or stamping your transaction with your private key, which means it is sure that we'll be able to identify who the author or the owner of the transaction is. Okay, so it could be shared publicly, which means the transaction is public. The data is public on the blockchain. So this only applies to the public blockchain. Okay, so we will be seeing what are the types of blockchains that are currently available in the market. So basically, though it is public or private, the data is shared in public, because in a completely public blockchain, anyone in the world would be able to see what the content is. In a private blockchain, whoever has access, it could be 1 or 2 or 10 participants. The 10 participants will be able to see the data. So it is shared publicly. Decentralized in the sense like the application is deployed to as many nodes that are available in the world. So whoever is acting as a node, or who's okay to eligible, or who likes to host the application, will be will be having a copy of that application with them. So it is decentralized. There is no downtime. Secure, because you are timestamping it. You are applying your private key on each and every transaction, and each and every miner who holds authority over the node, he mines a block and he timestamps it. He stamps his authority or the private key over it, trusted because of the private key and the encryptions, and it is automated. How is it automated? We have a code, say for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is used for payments. So the code has been deployed and there have been no upgrades to Bitcoin over the last few years or since its inception. So it is automated. It is working fine without any issues. So no one is there to go and maintain, to bring in a downtime and now deploy new code to it. Okay. What makes blockchain technology unique? So it enables P2P communication over a decentralized network. So decentralized because there is no central authority to have a gateway on who should participate in a transaction or who should hold authority over the network. Transactions are added to the immutable ledger upon consent. So whenever a miner, there could be group of miners who host this application elsewhere in the world. So not everyone can just download a copy of the ledger and they can add transactions to it just by mining. So there is a consensus algorithm that is applied. So whenever a transaction, whenever you make transactions and it bundles together into a block, there is a consensus algorithm that runs and only the winner will be able to put that block to the blockchain. So it is a peer-to-peer transaction, which is managed by a decentralized set of nodes in the network, which applies consensus to add the block or the set of transactions to the blockchain. Immutable ledger is already set, and state transitions. So whenever you make a transaction, it is nothing but when you have the code, which means say Bitcoin, it's a payment. So you are making a payment from, I make a payment to one of the other person in the world. I make a transition. I make a state transition where it debits my account and credits the other. So that is the state transition and incentives. So just to participate in the node, there will be no one in the world who would just participate without incentives. So every miner who participates in this process of mining the blocks to the blockchain network will be incentivized. So that is what makes blockchain unique. And these peers or the miners, they get incentivized for adding blocks to the network. So what are the blockchain implementations that are currently available? So Bitcoin, as we know, is the first implementation of the blockchain technology, which is a public blockchain technology implementation. So we have the private and also the hybrid models. So the one we are currently discussing today will be the Ethereum, which is a public blockchain, which is an implementation of a public blockchain. Whereas we also have private blockchains where only pre-approved, only authorized parties will be able to take part in the network. So this is called the private blockchain. We also have the hybrid model where it's a combination of public and private implementations. What are the blockchain use cases that we have? So we have the decentralized finance where any real world asset can be represented as a native token. So it can be tokenized and it can be referred within the blockchain. So you could make transactions. Say, for example, a mortgage, a house could be represented as a digital asset, a native token in the blockchain, and you could trade against it. Tokenization is where you have a token that represents a real world asset. Say, for example, you have your certificates, your educational certificates, your land records, everything. So that could be represented as a digital token and that could be traded against. In the recent days, it is much used in the capital raising format where you have an idea and you represent. So it is much similar to stocks in the market where you can represent your token to raise funds for your project and that can be used to implement or go ahead with your incubation projects. Then we have traceability and provenance. The example that I give you is the supply chain where the multiple parties have a smart contract implemented and the supply chain industry uses it to track how the logistics is managed, how the raw materials are used within the application, or how it is used to build a complete product. You will be able to trace what the origin of an asset is, how it gets transformed to a product, reconciliation cost reduction, and reconciliation revenue streams. So when you have a common application that is involved between different parties, what you can do is you have a common data structure that is flowing between the network. So each and every party that is participating in the network will have the same replica and the same data structure so that audit can be done. So you do not have different type of audits for different entities. So since the data that is passed in over the network is the same, you can have a single audit that has cost reduction. So, and also you now have the settlements that is implemented in most banks that is using the blockchain technology. The one example that I can give you is the XRP protocol. XRP is a settlements that is used like to transfer. You have the different kinds of transfer between different nations that could take uh, a huge time to settle the transaction between two parties. We are now using the XRP ledger. It could take few seconds or minutes to complete. So now we get started with Ethereum. So Ethereum is a general purpose blockchain. So why do I say this is a general purpose blockchain is that Bitcoin is only a decentralized payments implementation. So with Bitcoin, you can't do anything. Just payments is only possible on the Bitcoin blockchain network. But Ethereum is just more than payments. You can still do payments on the Ethereum network. But apart from payments, it gives you an option to deploy smart contracts. So what are smart contracts? The core machinery, before we get into the what a smart contract is, what is the core machinery that Ethereum operates on? To start with payments, whenever you want to pay something over the Ethereum network, you use the Ether, which is denoted by the ETH. The smallest value that you have is weight. So why is it important? Because whenever you make a transaction with the Ethereum network, you should spend some gas. Gas is nothing but the transaction fee that you are paying to run the code or to have your transaction added to the block. Okay, so you'll be paying in weight. That's a representation or the denomination of an Ether. So Ether has these denominations, but mostly we'll be dealing with weight and Ether. So the next that we talk about is Ethereum address. So normally when you want to communicate with a web application, what you have is an email ID and a password. And in a web application like Facebook, a social network like Facebook, you are identified by your username. So in this case, the email ID and password should be stored in a centralized database so that Facebook application can validate you and then log you into the network. So you'll be able to access and communicate with your peers. But in an Ethereum network, this is an application as well. But how it differs is that there is an address and a private key. Okay, so how you generate this address and all these are pure technical concepts, but still how you are identified in an Ethereum network is by your address and your private key. So the address is what identifies you. So whenever you want to send a transaction, send money or Ether to someone, or you want to communicate with the smart contract, you are identified by your address, or the smart contract is also identified by its own address. And in this case, the credentials are not stored anywhere. You just communicate with the Ethereum network, and these credentials, the address and the private key, these are not stored anywhere in the network. You hold complete authority of it. So we said an Ethereum address. So that is called an account. So what is an Ethereum account? An Ethereum account is a combination of an address and its private key. So it is closely bound, okay? And it can hold balance or it can send transactions, which means when you send Ether to someone, they'll be able to hold that Ether in the same account. And also, whenever you have or whenever you want to communicate with a smart contract, you can still use the same account. You can spend for a transaction using the same Ether or a way. So it's a denomination of Ether. So basically, Ethereum has two types of accounts. One is an externally owned account, which is denoted by EOA, and a contract account. So why is it important in today's session is that an externally owned account is nothing but the personal accounts of us, which is peers. So I have an Ethereum account, I'll be having an account address. So that is called an externally owned account because the account is external to the Ethereum, which is not generated by the Ethereum network. It is or the Ethereum virtual machine, but it is my account that is generated from the private key. Whereas there is also an account called the contract account, which means whenever you write a smart contract code, the Ethereum virtual machine, it will convert the smart contract code to a bytecode, and it will add a transaction, add the transaction to a block, and it generates an account address for that contract. So that is called a contract account. So we'll be able to see today what a contract is and what an external account is during our demonstration. So when you write an Ethereum smart contract code, so mostly we have different kinds of implementations or languages to write Ethereum smart contracts. The one I'll be covering today is Solidity source code or using the Solidity language. There are other languages like Viper. You could use that too, but I'll be covering Solidity today. So whenever you write a smart contract in Solidity, it gets compiled to a bytecode. So why does it get compiled to a bytecode? Because Solidity is a high-level language. So the Ethereum virtual machine, which now processes this bytecode, which is much similar to the Java virtual machine if you are developing applications on Java. So it is much similar to that, where the Solidity source code, the SOL, the high-level language, gets compiled to a bytecode and then it is deployed to the EVM. Okay, the EVM is nothing but the Ethereum virtual machine, which processes all these transactions. So from general purpose blockchains to a decentralized application. So by just having a smart contract is not enough, because now we have it in the Ethereum virtual machine running, we have a contract address. Then how do you interact with the smart contract? That is when a decentralized app or DApp comes into the picture. A DApp is nothing but a combination of a smart contract and a web user interface. So you write your smart contract, deploy it to an EVM, and then you write a web interface that interacts with the smart contract. So the Ethereum developer ecosystem has multiple tool sets and a complete ecosystem available where you could pick your interesting the projects that you are interested on and start developing or doing projects on your own. So we have the scale projects for scaling. So it is much similar to where the cloud implementations, the AWS and other stuff. We have the storage on IPFS, the interplanetary file system, where you would be able to store data, a file, into chunks, into different, split into different blocks and store it to the blockchain. So you have different implementations on different projects that are available in the Ethereum ecosystem, and you can pick one and use it to implement your projects and put your effort to learn in Ethereum Solidity, using Solidity. So the technical concept, when coming to the technical concepts on Solidity, so a smart contract on Solidity starts with a license statement, which is just a comment. Okay? You just write a comment. Then you will be declaring the type, the pragma statement, which declares what version of Solidity the code is being written on. This is needed because when you write, the technology is evolving, the language is evolving. So whenever you write smart contracts using Solidity, you will have to define the version in the pragma statement to define to the EVM that and how should the code be compiled to, on what version of this Solidity language the code is written. You have the imports, interfaces. So we'll be looking into these in the demo session now. A contract layout will have data types, we have events. So whenever you are communicating with a web interface, events are important because when a transaction happens, the web interface should be notified on what event is happening in the smart contract execution. We have modifiers, function modifiers to see if a function within the smart contract is accessible to the outside world or not. A struct is there where you'll be able to define your own structures. So apart from the primitive data types like string, int, and other stuff, like you can define your own structures. So there are other visibilities as well. So whenever you write a function, so what visibility is there? So is it visible within my contract or is it visible to the external world? So you can define all your visibility modifiers within your smart contract code. So these are some of the data types. So these are some of the data types that are normally present in all the languages. So you have the integer, the Boolean, and specifically to Ethereum, we have the address which is needed in the blockchain. We have string, we have the struct to define your own custom types. We have the enum and we have arrays. We also have mapping, which is a key value tag. So now it's time to get into building a smart contract on Ethereum using the Solidity language. I switch my screen to the browser. So I'll be using the Remix IDE to develop the Solidity smart contract code. So this Remix IDE is an online IDE to write smart contracts, and you'll be able to compile and test your code here. So I have created a new workspace and we have the smart contract. So these are the default examples that come in. Okay. So I'm going to create a new file where we'll be implementing an event voting project today. So where this goes with the extension of SOL, which is for Solidity. So every Solidity file, as mentioned, so I take a copy of what we are implementing. So this is a comment. Okay. So we declare an SPDX license information. So your smart contract could be unlicensed. So SPDX. So you have your SPDX license identifier. So right now I'm unlicensed. Okay. Then I declare the pragma statement. Pragma is needed because you will have to define what version of Solidity that you are currently using. So I'll be using the 0.8 version, which is currently recent. Then we have to define the smart contract. So what contract are we writing today? We are going to write an event voting smart contract. So I say contract event voting. This contract is going to have the global variables. So what is the global variable? First, I should know who is the owner of this contract. So I will define a new variable with a type address, which is visible to the public. And I define it, I give the name as an owner. Then this is one of the global variables. Along with that, I should also hold the events. What are the events that are there that will be added to this contract? So I have this as a string array and I mark it as events. Then I have these events are nothing but I mean, as we move through, like you will be able to vote for an event. So this contract implements the voting scenario. So then we have events that are emitted from the blockchain. So event is nothing but an event will be emitted from the blockchain to the web application so that the web application can subscribe and use it to process this information. So I define an event and I say new event added, and this would be a string and an event name. And I would define a new event for vote event voted, and I would say an event name. Okay. Then we have custom modifiers. A custom modifier is nothing but say when in case of an event voting, the admin would be able to add new events. So we should not make it public to for everyone to go and add events to this smart contract. So I will define a modifier where only admin would be able to add events to this smart contract. So how do I define it? I would say require is a keyword which asserts, which assures that this condition is satisfied. So I would say message dot or the owner of this contract is always the message dot sender. So which means when this annotation or this modifier is added to a function, only the owner of this function would be able to add new events. This is always added with an underscore. I will tell you why this before that. Okay. Then we will be having the complex data structures. So this string array is actually a complex data structure where it holds an array. So the primitive data types are string, int, and the boolean, whereas the arrays are complex data structures. And then we have the constructor of this application. Why do we have a constructor? A constructor is the one that runs as soon as the contract is deployed to the Ethereum virtual machine. So this constructor will have the information on who or the owner of this contract. So who deploys this contract? So I would say owner is equals to the message.sender. So the message.sender is actually a global variable within the Ethereum network, the Ethereum virtual machine, where you can access it and send the owner. So there are other variables as well, but to get started, we'll be using the message.sender. So we have this constructor. When this contract is deployed to this Ethereum virtual machine, I would pick this call and I would say set this owner to the message.sender. So in this way, as soon as the contract is deployed to the Ethereum virtual machine, I'll get hold of the owner and I can get these details. And then now we will be creating the functions. So the first function is function add event or add new event. Okay. This event will accept a name. So this goes by the function keyword, the function name, and parameters that are needed. And we will be making it public and can be called only by the admin. Okay, it does not return anything, so I can just ignore it. And what I'll be doing is I need to add it to this events array. So events array dot push the event name. So whenever you're adding a string, you should give a keyword for memory or callout, because normally in an Ethereum virtual machine, string is treated as a complex type, which is, I mean, you could be using a bytes instead, but for the purpose of this demo, I'll be using a string. I should denote it with the memory keyword. So now I have a function. So as soon as an event is pushed to this array, I'll have to push an event outside. So I'll say emit an event, emit this new event added, and I pass in the event name. Okay. Done. So now I also have the other function to vote for an event. So vote for event. Memory and again the event name. But this time it should not be done by the admin. So you can either have a modifier defined as a function here and you can use it on the functions that you write, or there is another way you can use a request here. Okay, so you can have require owner not equals to message.sender. Okay, so you have this. So it does not return anything. Then what we do is I would like to vote for an event. So to vote for an event, how do I keep track of the votes? So that is when we have the mapping functionality where we say mapping every address that wants to vote for an event. I have a key value pair. So this address. So whenever I send an event, send an vote to the blockchain, to this smart contract, I say map this address to the event name and keep track of it. So I would say public event vote. Okay, so this way I would be able to do event tracker of this address message.sender equal to the event name. So it maintains a map and says this address has voted for this event. Okay, and I would also like to know what are the total votes for event. So for which event? Public, and this returns me an integer. Okay. An integer in Solidity is defined by uint. So how do I track the event votes? So we'll again have a mapping which says the event name or the event. We have the event name and the number of votes that it has received. So event votes. So now when I cast a vote, I would also add this event and say plus plus. So I'm adding. So at every time when I vote for an event, that event would be added to this map and the value of that, the integer of that event will be incremented so that I can get the total votes. So when I want to get the total vote count here, I can just say event votes of this event. I can just return it. Okay. So why does complain is that this is just going to retrieve the data. We are not going to push any new data. So it's asking me to mark it as view. So public, they're just going to view the data from the blockchain. So I would say just view. Okay. So these are the three functions that we have. We are able to add a new event. We are able to vote for an event, and we'll get the total votes for an event. So how do you test and deploy this code to the smart contract? So in Remix, you have the compiler and the deploy and run transactions tabs. The compiler, whenever you save your application, you will be able to see this icon here where it says the code is compiled. And to deploy your code, you can just go to the deploy and run. You will be provided with the default, the JavaScript VMs and a set of accounts. Okay, so you can just go here. The default contract that you're currently working on, the workspace will be selected. You can just deploy it to the network, and you should be able to see your smart contract, the methods, and everything listed here. You will also be able to see the console window. Okay, so now when I want to, you can see that when I click on the owner, it says 05B38. So how it gets this address is that if you see here, the first account that was used, 05B3 ends with DD04. This account was used to deploy this smart contract to the network, and I would see the same address here because this account was used to deploy the smart contract. He is treated as the owner. So you could use any of the other accounts as well, but this account will be treated as the owner. Now, this owner will be able to add new events. So I would say I can add this event, Ethereum basics, add new event. So if you see here, transact to Ethereum voting, add new event, and this data has been added. So what if I change the account type to a different address? So now I'm not the account owner, and if I try to add a new event, I would get an error. Okay, because I am not the owner of this event. Okay, so I'll just change that to Ethereum, the owner account, and now when I add it, I'll be able to get the details. So now I can see how many votes. So I want to vote for an application. So when I vote for an application, I should not be the owner of the owner. I go back to a different account and I say I'm going to vote for Ethereum basics. Vote for it. So the vote has been added. So if you see the transaction is successful and the vote has been added. So now when I go and check for the total votes, the vote count is 1. Okay. And when I go to a different account from here, and again I vote for an event, I make the vote count is 2. Okay. So this is how you will be able to test your application from your Remix IDE. So you can mix and match this requirement, and you can change as many values. You can add many restrictions. You can add the functional modifiers to your application and see how your code works. Okay. So this is one demo that I wanted to show you, but to extend it as well, how this is a smart contract. So how can we extend it as a DApp? So I have this implementation already implemented, like this code, and this is one of the web interfaces that interacts with the smart contract. So this is a little advanced, and we need to know about Web3 and JavaScript to interact with the smart contract. But to show you a glance of how this interaction takes place, I have this smart contract. The code that we have written here today is already there here available in my machine. What I'm going to do is, instead of using this online Ethereum, the Remix IDE, I'm going to use my local network to deploy the smart contract code onto my local machine, onto my local Ethereum network, and show you how a DApp would access this data. And I mean, I would also show you how to access this smart contract from the Remix IDE. So I'm going to go to my workspace where the code is currently present. Okay, and I'm going to deploy, start my local network first, the local Ethereum network. Okay, So if you see here, I have five accounts created on my local network, and the application is running at my local machine. And now I'm going to deploy the front-end application, which is the front-end JavaScript code. When it deploys, I'm going to connect. So this Ethereum, this Remix IDE, the online IDE, is not only used for testing and deploying your accounts locally to the JavaScript VM, you would also be able to connect it to your locally running the Ethereum network that is running on your machine. So what I'm going to do as the contract, so now you see my contract is deployed totally to deployments, and I would get a contract address. So when I say and a contract address, these accounts are externally owned accounts, which is it could refer to a entity or a pair. It could refer to a person. Whereas when you deploy a contract, you will get a contract address that is generated by the EVM. So now I'm going to connect this online Remix IDE to my local network. So how I could do that is, this is using a JavaScript VM. I'm going to use a Web3 provider, and by default, it will give me at what port it is running. So I would say okay, and then I'm going to take this contract address. I find the contract address, this one, copy this, and then I paste it over here at address. So what this does is, if you see here, it's only showing me 5 accounts that are from my locally running Ethereum network. And also, when I say at address, you would not be using the deploy because you're not going to deploy it. Rather, I already have a contract at address location, and I'm accessing this event voting smart contract from that address. So I'm going to add Ethereum basics. See who the contract owner is. The contract owner is 1958. Start this application for deploy this code. Phone is deployed. It is deploying the event routing contract address here. I'm just copying this address. One XP. Okay, this is the owner account, one XP. Now when I try to add, okay, it gets added. I'm adding two events here. Advanced. So when I try to vote for an event, she should not be the owner. So now when I say Ethereum advance, I would get an error. Okay, because I'm the owner and I should not be able to vote. So I go to a different account and I vote for an event. There could be some problem at the moment. Okay. But anyways, how this application works is that, so whenever I try to deploy this code, I'll be able to see. If you see here, the contract address will be displayed, the owner of the contract will be displayed, and along with that, I'm able to interact with the smart contract from the application here. When I make changes from my Remix IDE, I'm able to see what are the events that are added and how many votes are received. So right now, this part is non-functional. Okay, it's giving me an error. I'll have to check it because the Ethereum network is currently running. It's having a lot of load, but still, the DApp lets you to interact with the blockchain. You can using this Web3 or the DApp mode, the interface, you will be able to add or functionality to communicate with the smart contract. Okay, so this implementation of how to write the smart contract, deploy it, and test it on the Remix IDE will be provided to you as a document, and you can uh, check it and you can get back in the Slack channel for queries. So I'm done with my presentation, and if you have any queries, then I can answer it. Okay. In Ethereum also
Thanks,
we are having
Rajamani.
miners. Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
yeah,
In
so
Ethereum as well, we are having miners. The miners are the ones who will be adding the blocks to the blockchain, who will be now consolidating the transactions every now and then and adding it to the blockchain network. So yes, we have miners in the Ethereum network as well. Can we add account information on the blockchain or it come under violation? What kind of account information are you asking about? Could you be more specific? Can we add what account information? So this account I say is the address is public, which means it is like your username in Facebook. So now it is with just the username, people can't do anything. You still need the private key to stamp your transaction and add it to the block, right? So now this account information, even if it's made public, it is not going to do anything. So the hacker or anyone having just the address will not be able to take any funds or send a transaction on your behalf. Yeah. Could you please tell me other skill coding, like blockchain development? No, the Solidity smart contract, the language is much similar to JavaScript and Python. So now if you are comfortable about the data types and the data structures, like the structures, the mapping, I suppose Python has the same concept as well, the key value test, the map, the tuples and other stuff. So if you are comfortable with one language, one programming language, basically a typed programming language, you should be able to go well with Solidity too. How will public and private blockchains work? How corporate is using? See, public blockchain is where if I have a system with a good hash power, okay, so I have a good processing system, I have a good system that can process, that has many processes with a nice uh, uh, graphics card installed, I would be able to mine Ethereum on my local machine, at my home itself. But a private blockchain is different, where we have this enterprise parties. Only the enterprise actors who they give authority or they trust will be added to the network. It's not like everyone will be added to the blockchain network. This enterprise or the private blockchain ensures that whenever you want to add an entity to the private blockchain network, only trusted parties. They have the KYC mechanisms, like who's added, when are they added, until what time are they added, and what grants do they have. All these come into picture when you are speaking about private blockchains. So one such is, you can have R3 Corda, Quorum, and Hyperledger Fabric. These are certain implementations of private blockchains. Okay. Now, storing structured and unstructured data in Ethereum. Suppose I have data coming from a UA on an IoT device temperature. I want to store all three single transaction. How can I do it? See, I mean, I'll read this question, but when you want to store data on the blockchain, normally, as and when your data, so when you say three, this three may be too small as it sounds to start with, but normally it is not recommended to store the actual data into the chain. What I would normally recommend in your implementation is that whenever you want to store data on the blockchain, store the data onto a centralized data storage like a relational database or a NoSQL database. Then bring just the hash value here. Okay, that in that way you also have the actual data stored to a relational database, which you could refer in future for the actual values, because the hash can be used for data integrity. Okay, so in that case, you can anytime validate whether your data stored in the relational database and the one that you have in the blockchain is the same or not. Okay, that is what normally people do, because we don't store the complete data into the network, because data storage in the blockchain is really costly. As and when you work with Ethereum, you'll come to know that as say for example, for every transaction we have a gas limit. Okay, so as and when your data storage grows huge, the amount of gas that you need to send this transaction will be very high, which is ether. So right now ether is about 3 lakh rupees. One ether costs you 3 lakh rupees. So in that case, whenever this is a public blockchain as such, so when people try to use this public blockchain, they would not be interested to send that much value just to store data, right? So in that case, what I would suggest is to store just the hash on the blockchain and the actual data to be relational databases outside the blockchain. Who can be an admin for how can be admin? So no one is the admin. Admin, I say, is the one who deploys this contract. So you could have limitations. So this smart contract, you can have restrictions on how this smart contract is accessed. So you can define your access modifiers here. And as part of your web interface, you would be able to control who accesses. Say, for example, in this case, only an admin would be able to add a new event. And all the other parties, other than the admin, would be able to vote for an event. But to get the total votes, anyone would be able to see the votes. Okay, these are the restrictions that you can set within the smart contract. So no one is an admin here. The reason we say this is a decentralized network is that you don't have any centralized authority to control it, but you will have to pay attention to the smart contract that you are writing. You will have to bring in, or you will have to sit and analyze with your business analyst to see what are the coverages that are needed, right, to write a smart contract. So all your validation should come into this smart contract. I suppose this is the same question. Disadvantages or limitations in blockchain. We don't have any disadvantages. I mean, I would not say it is a disadvantage. It is a growing technology, but still, limitation is that now normally when you have a centralized web application, you can control the throughput and other stuff. But blockchains normally you have a delay when you can add transactions to the block. But these are there are other blockchains that could process a transaction in a much faster speed. But still, there are limitations with the amount of data that you can store to the blockchain, and there are limitations with the time taken to add a block to the blockchain. About consensus mechanism can be used here other than, yes, Ethereum currently uses the proof of work algorithm, where the miner would to add a block to the blockchain, they would do a proof of work, which means they will have to find a nonce based on a condition, and they only after it is found they'll be add the block to the blockchain. But right now, Ethereum is currently moving to a proof of stake algorithm. It may not be fast, but it will take time. Proof of stake is that whoever commits a large amount of Ethereum to add the block to the blockchain, then only then the block will be added. So it is like who holds control. So proof of stake is not really endorsed within the community, but still Ethereum is moving towards the proof of stake algorithm. What is message variable and what is underscore, right? See, message is a global variable within the Ethereum virtual machine. Say, for example, there are certain variables that you can access. See, these are user-defined variables within the smart contract. But Ethereum virtual machine provides us certain variables like the message.sender and message.value, where I would be able to get who's sending this transaction. So this message.sender is nothing but this account address. So whenever I trigger a function call, the message.sender value will hold the account address that is triggering this transaction. And this message.value is nothing but the amount of ether or way that I'm sending it. Okay. In a similar way, we have a lot of these EVM variables that are available to us. You can use it within your application to do some validation, to find who the account owner is, to find what the value of ether that is sent in and other stuff. You could head on to the Solidity, there is the documentation where it provides you all the variable informations and other stuff. Right? These are huge, but still you could refer it to write your smart contracts. Okay. Um, if there are no other questions, then I'm done.
There is one
And
question.
yes, yes.
Yeah. So can smart contracts from Hyperledger Fabric used here?
It may not be used directly, but there are layer 2 solutions where you would be able to, they enable cross platform access. Like we have Link, there is one kind of, no, there are different kinds of blockchain projects which enable you to do that. But normally what we do is, we are working on the similar kind of implementation where you could have your smart contract, okay? You have your DApp application. So this is one kind of a web application that interacts. So when you have this model, what you'll be able to do is, this is an Ethereum DApp, right? You can expose this as a web service, and then you can expose it to Hyperledger Fabric. In a similar way, Hyperledger Fabric would also be able to expose APIs. In that way, you would be able to communicate between the platforms. It is not pure direct communication between platforms, but still exposing APIs via the Web3 interface. So I'm accessing the smart contract using the Web3 interface. So Web3 is nothing but a library, a JS library that helps you communicate with smart contracts. So when you are able to enable Web3 to do a communication with smart contract from a DApp, you would also be able to expose this as a web service from a Node.js application as such. So this will help you communicate, interact with different blockchain networks. Yes, that is possible. Do we have any more questions?
I guess it's
So,
Sainath are in chat. Yeah.
yes, Vasan. Yes,
Does
I'll
it
be sharing the code. Yeah, I'll be sharing the code, the GitHub repository, the documentation. So you'll receive a documentation on how the smart contract that I wrote on Remix is present. You'll also be able to do. I'll also be uploading this DApp application as well. So I'll be sharing the deck, the workbook, and the source code in the Slack channels as well. Yeah, I'll do that. Any other questions?
I guess for Sainath, he also asked for the same question, smart contracts. Does it go with the KYC use case?
You mean the Ethereum smart contracts?
Can you elaborate more, Sainath?
Sorry, if you are available.
He has asked in
Yes.
chat.
Yes, it does. But there are caveats around how you store this data, who has access to this data, and other stuff. But I would say, there is a lot of analysis needed on when you do KYC on a public blockchain. We might do it on a private blockchain. That would be much more suitable. Or if we are going to implement it on a public blockchain like Ethereum, we might have to check multiple use cases around who has access to this KYC and how they are given access to, or what is the duration of their access, what data are they accessing, and how long are they accessing. So these are some analysis that we might have to do before we do KYC. But I suppose there is an implementation of KYC in one of our governments in India, but I'm not sure if it's on the public blockchain. We could do that as well.
I don't think we have any more questions left.
Okay. Okay then. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the participants who stayed so long, in different time zones.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for joining the session. We have upcoming events in this month of October. You can register at the link that is given in the chat. We also have Women Who Code Connect coming on November 18th and 19th. You can scan the QR code here. Do not forget to add your promo code WWCodeBlockchain to get 50% off. You can also follow us on our social media handles if you are interested in blockchain or want to learn more of our social events. Um, you can add us on LinkedIn. You can search us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as well. You can also email us if you have any questions related to blockchain, and you can also join the Slack channel. So at last, thank you everyone for joining. It was a wonderful session. Thank you, Mr. Rajpandian.